Oronoz. I have the privilege of moderating this panel. I would first like to thank the World Jurist Association for organizing this panel on gender equality as a catalyst for the achievement of the UN's SDGs, and for giving me the opportunity to moderate discussion between such accomplished women. Today, we will have the honor of hearing from, Sujata Manohar, who is a retired Justice of the Supreme Court of India and a former member of the National Human Rights Commission of India. Throughout her career, she has championed women's rights and economic empowerment. In 2020, she received the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Medal of Honor by the World Jurist Association in recognition of her commitment to the strengthening of democracy and the rule of law. I think I'm just going to introduce first everyone, and then we can just start talking.
Sure.
Lisa, I'm hoping, please correct me if I say this wrong, Lisa Beatty Frelinghuysen, who's a who is a principal at Banyan Global, an experienced corporate attorney, and a passionate advocate for gender equality and reproductive rights and reproductive justice. She was law clerk to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and worked on the U.S. Supreme Court's critical gender equality case involving Virginia Military Institute. I think most of us know that case. Hermine Hayes-Klein, who's an attorney, human rights advocate, and public speaker who is particularly passionate about protecting women's rights in maternity care systems. Between 2012 and 2017, she organized 6 international conferences on human rights and reproductive justice in maternal health care in The Hague, Strasbourg, the US, South Africa, and India. Her legal practice focuses on advocacy related to informed consent and reproductive choice in pregnancy and childbirth. And we have attorney Hilarie Bass, who's former president of the American Bar Association and founder of the Bass Institute for Diversity and Inclusion. She is a global evangelist for gender parity and an outspoken advocate for expanding the ranks of women leaders at corporations, nonprofits, and other institutions. Before we delve into our discussion about gender equality and its role as a catalyst for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, commonly referred to as SDGs, I would like to take a moment to give a very brief overview of these SDGs and the state of gender equality and inequality today. The 17 SDGs were established in 2012 at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro with the aim of promoting international development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The SDGs are the successors of the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, and had ushered in significant progress in the fight against poverty, disease, and hunger since their establishment in 2000. With the SDGs, the world's nations undertook a renewed commitment to finish this work with an emphasis on tackling the root causes of the most pressing and prevalent global challenges. UN members and UN member countries aim to achieve the SDGs and related targets by 2030. I believe that's an increasingly unrealistic deadline, given the unprecedented challenges of the last few years, specifically the COVID pandemic, the subsequent economic recession, the widespread disintegration of democratic values, and the urgent threat to climate change. Given these major roadblocks, achieving the SDGs will require creative solutions that tackle multiple issues simultaneously and efficiently. Fortunately, an essential characteristic of these SDGs is that all 17 goals are interconnected, meaning progress in one goal promotes progress in the other goals. This panel will discuss how advancing gender equality, which is in itself an SDG, SDG 5, serves as a catalyst for the achievement of other SDGs, with a particular focus on the eradication of poverty, decent work for all, and economic growth, as well as peace, justice, and strong institutions. We will also touch upon the many challenges and roadblocks that hinder and sometimes cripple the fight for gender equality. Most notably, the COVID-19 crisis and the subsequent economic downturn that has disproportionately impacted the lives of women and girls. We all know, I think we all know, that the pandemic confined many women and girls to the domestic spheres. Women lost the bulk of jobs, while the closure of schools and care services increased the burden of unpaid domestic labor. Even before the pandemic, women spent more than 3 times as many hours as men on unpaid domestic work and care. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, there has also been a dramatic increase in violence against women and girls, especially domestic violence. At the same time, the proliferation of armed conflicts, the erosion of democratic institutions, as I mentioned, climate change, and environmental degradation are also exacerbating existing inequalities. These circumstances have slowed progress towards achieving SDG 5, in fact, which is gender equality. In fact, and I mentioned this earlier at another panel, the UN estimates that it will take up to 286 years to remove discriminatory laws and close gender gaps in legal protection, that it will take 140 years for women to be represented equally in positions of power and leadership in the workplace, and that it will take 47 years to achieve equal representation in national parliaments and legislative bodies. These estimates paint, I believe, a very bleak picture for the future. Thankfully, we have leaders, like the women in this panel and in this room, who are willing to rise to the challenge. I think the equality of women and girls must be achieved on 2 fronts: in the legal political sphere and in the social economic sphere. These 2 spheres are obviously interconnected. Just as legal and political challenges or changes influence social and economic dynamics, social movements and economic interests may lead and should lead to progress and regression in the legal political sphere. I think as lawyers, our job is to wield the law to achieve meaningful social, economic, and political advances for women, girls, and society as a whole. We must challenge not only facially discriminatory laws, but also deeply entrenched social norms and widespread economic deprivation that hamper the potential of women and girls. Accordingly, it's imperative that, working with other advocates, policymakers, and stakeholders, we implement gender-responsive approaches to global challenges like poverty, hunger, armed conflict, and climate change. While sustainable development cannot be achieved while gender inequality exists, the inverse is also true. Sustainable socioeconomic development is necessary to expand opportunities for the political participation, education, economic autonomy, and overall empowerment of women and girls. And with that, I'm going to present our first panelist, who's going to be addressing us via video.
It is an honor to speak at the World Law Congress panel on gender equality as a catalyst for UN goals on sustainable development. As lawyers, we are justified in putting our faith in the rule of law as a guarantor of peace and security in the world. Gender equality is an important aspect of the rule of law because the rule of law must be rule of just laws, laws that respect human rights and do not discriminate on the grounds of race and religion, color, gender, caste, or any other irrelevant ground. Gender equality is essential so that all can lead a life with dignity. In the last 50 years or so, there has been a growing recognition of women's rights as human rights, which must be respected in the civilized society. I would like to focus on economic rights of women. There can be no equality without an equal right to hold property, to earn an income, or being given an equal opportunity to function in the economic sphere and to contribute to the economic life of the nation. As UN Women said while celebrating International Women's Day, with more women in the boardroom, greater equality in legislative rights, and increased critical mass of women's visibility as impressive role models in every aspect of life, one would think that women have gained equality. The unfortunate fact is that women are still not paid equal wages as those paid to their male counterparts, and women are not present in equal numbers in business or politics. Education, health, and secure environment are essential prerequisites for a woman in order to function on the basis of equality with men in socio-economic or public sphere. One of the major problems faced by women when they seek work outside home is physical safety and protection from violence, such as sexual harassment at workplace. In India, we have enacted an act called Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. The law was enacted to give effect to a judgment of the Supreme Court in Vishaka versus the state of Rajasthan in 1997. Women now demand structural transformation in society, making it possible for women to participate on an equal footing in economic life and contribute, while also fulfilling their shared responsibilities towards children, elders, and the sick in the family. Women have also voiced their concern about lack of effective protection against violence, domestic violence, violence in society such as rape or molestation or sexual harassment at work, making it difficult for women to function effectively in all spheres of significant human activity. There is also a growing fear about feminization of poverty. About 70% of the world's poor are women. Traditional, customary, or tribal laws in many countries do not give to women an equal right to inherit property or even a right to hold property. Many fundamental changes are needed. How does one achieve this economic transformation? There are three important players in this field: just and fair laws that do not discriminate, an independent judiciary to enforce human rights, and social attitudinal change. It is not easy to eradicate deep-seated cultural prejudices or to alter traditions that perpetuate discrimination. Obviously, law by itself may not be enough to change these ancient so-called values, but it is an important game changer when combined with a supportive judiciary and, most important, a social will to change. Courts can play a crucial role in enforcing constitutional values and human rights of equality and non-discrimination. In a wider perspective, the US courts and the European Court of Human Rights have often dealt with gender discrimination in employment, including equal pay for equal work. The High Court of Tanzania relied on CEDAW as well as ICCPR and the African Charter of Human and People's Rights to hold that the Bill of Rights would prevail over the customary law which prevented women from selling clan land. Indian Supreme Court in the case of Muthamma versus Union of India in 1979 struck down a rule of the Indian Foreign Service that required female employees to obtain government permission in writing before marriage. In McKinnon-McKenzie versus Audrey DeCosta, the concept of comparable worth of work was applied by the Indian Supreme Court in a case demanding equal pay for equal work. This gives a flavor of the range of cases that our courts have dealt with. To bring about gender equality In the economic sphere, we require human rights-based jurisprudence and effective law enforcement. It is also necessary to have an effective movement for socio-economic transformation to give effect to equality of rights and responsibilities. I hope that the UN goals and the human rights movement speed up this transformation and attainment of gender equality in all its aspects. Thank you very much.
Well, I think I like the fact that it's a small room. I think it allows for a more intimate conversation, and I think we could start. I'm gonna try it again. Lisa Bidi Frelinguisen.
Perfect.
And if not, thank you for that. I figure we could hear from each panelist first, and then we can open up and have a conversation, and you can ask questions, and we can keep talking about this topic.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to our Chief Justice here. I've enjoyed getting to know you and your commitment to justice, and honored to be participating along with my panelists, wise advocates. My name is Lisa, and I have been involved in gender equality in this country for about 30 years, first at the ACLU, writing about women's rights and reproductive freedom, as it was called then, at Stanford Law School, both writing and teaching on women and healthcare, at the Supreme Court working with Justice Ginsburg on the Supreme Court's last women's rights opinion, United States versus Virginia, and then serving on the board of Planned Parenthood, which seeks to provide reproductive health care, especially to the underserved. As you all know in this room, we have been slowly but steadily marching toward greater gender equality in the United States over the last century, and more significantly in the last 50 years. Today, we have women CEOs, board members, business owners. We have women Supreme Court justices, vice presidents in the House and in the Senate. We have women sports heroes. We have women artists exhibiting at the Met Museum for the first time. A living woman artist is inside the Met Museum, Cecily Brown. If any of you have some free time, it's worth seeing. We have a female singer who's about to hit $1 billion on one tour. We have women adventurers climbing mountains and surfing mammoth waves. But of course, all of this has been hard won, and the progress incomplete. Women still get paid, as our first panelist mentioned, somewhere between 65 and 80 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts. The winning U.S. women's soccer team just won the hard-fought battle for pay equity last year. We don't have policies that would increase the playing field in gender equality, such as paid parental leave, child care, and universal health care. These are issues we need to solve. I believe that we will solve, and we are moving in the right direction, albeit far too slowly. However, in one critical area key to gender equality, we are going backward, and that is reproductive health care. I see the issue of reproductive justice, and by that I mean women and those capable of becoming pregnant having access to reproductive health care through a gender equality lens. Simply stated, women will never achieve equality with men without the ability to make decisions about whether and when to bear children. It seems so obvious, but in the last 2 decades, fueled by a vocal minority on the far right, we have seen an unprecedented increase in abortion restrictions in our country. And last summer, we fell off the cliff with the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs overturning Roe and Casey. So my thesis today, it's a little bit of a twist on the theme, but is to talk about while Latin America has experienced a green wave, the United States is experiencing what I would call a gray wave. and the effects of this are extremely challenging. First and foremost, to the health of women, and especially poor women in red states. In addition, gender equality will suffer, and so too will our great legal institutions and respect for the rule of law. So what do I mean by the green wave? I'm referring to the abortion rights movement in various countries in Latin America that have collectively adopted the color green as the symbol of their movement. Green bandanas were first adopted in Argentina and then adopted by abortion rights advocates across Latin America. The Green Wave activists have contributed to the 2020 legalization of abortion in Argentina, the 2022 decriminalization of abortion in Colombia, the exemption to the abortion ban for cases of rape in Ecuador, and the Supreme Court of Mexico issued a unanimous 2021 ruling that decriminalized abortion, and the Chief Justice there credited the Green Wave activists for shifting the national consciousness as well as the position of the Mexican Supreme Court on this issue. The Green Wave was gathering momentum, gaining groundswell among our southern neighbors, and then it stopped in its tracks when it reached the United States in June of 2022. The Green Wave there became the gray wave here. What do I mean by a gray wave? Gray, I think, is the color we associate with old, withering, dying ashes. So by gray wave, I mean that we are going backward to the old days, and our rights here are dying. Gray is also a mixture of white and black and signifies murkiness, smoke, cloudy, foggy, lack of clarity and confusion. So by gray wave, I also mean that we are living in an entirely new state of chaos. Roe versus Wade was probably our country's most known decision. Roe is a household name. In 1973, the Supreme Court recognized the constitutional right of women, and again, I'm including people capable of getting pregnant in that term, to choose to terminate that pregnancy to have an abortion. The right was not absolute, as Casey later clarified. States could enact restrictions that didn't present an undue burden to women seeking an abortion. States, however, could not ban abortion outright. In 2022, the Dobbs decision overturned Roe and Casey, and the court did so by looking back at what the framers of the 14th Amendment would have thought of abortion. They sought to understand the predominant views of the 1860s. And they found, no surprise, that in the 1860s there was no right to an abortion. Notions of liberty and equality at that time did not include a right to an abortion. Liberals questioned why go back to a time when our views of equality and liberty were not nearly as sophisticated as they are today. We have evolved in our understanding of equality and liberty. We have expanded our concept of equality to include people of color, women, LGBTQ communities. Those people were left out of we the people in our founders' time, and why would we limit our perspective to those old, outdated concepts which, frankly, should have died? The gray wave, a desire to return to the old days, to go backward, to let key constitutional protections for women die. A more cynical view might say to put women in her place. We also experienced an unprecedented level of chaos after the announcement of Dobbs. Throughout the states, we suddenly saw a patchwork of changing laws. Abortion was immediately banned in 9 states through their trigger laws. Today, it's currently banned in 13 states. Abortion is unavailable in another state due to ongoing litigation. Abortion is very restricted in several states with bans at 6 weeks, often before women know they're pregnant, and 12 weeks. And some states ban helping young persons to travel out of state for an abortion. Other states are enacting laws to protect their citizens who seek to help people in other states get an abortion. There's an attack on mifepristone, the abortion medication, that could have national implications. District attorneys, likewise, add additional confusion in terms of what they will prosecute and what they will not. District attorneys, as you all know, have discretion over their charging decisions, who they will prosecute. But several states with anti-abortion governors and anti-abortion legislatures have sought to restrict that discretionary power, and some states are seeking measures to discipline or remove DAs. Various district attorneys have come out saying they will prosecute all abortion actions, and others have said that they will not prosecute abortion actions, adding considerable confusion and chaos to our legal understanding. Doctors, likewise, are experiencing chaos and confusion. Doctors are faced with patients in dire circumstances and are spending hours on the phone with attorneys trying to determine whether they can treat a patient in need. There are so many examples of this, but I'm not going to dwell on them today due to lack of time. From a medical perspective, abortion is far less risky than pregnancy and childbirth, which we'll hear more about today. And we have maternal mortality crisis in our country, especially among Black and brown communities. We've experienced a 33% rise in maternal mortality during the pandemic. Pregnancy, remember, is much more dangerous than abortion. And among individuals in different states, there's so much confusion. People don't know whether abortion is legal in their state. They don't know whether emergency contraception is legal in their state. A new survey suggested that half of the women are unsure if medication abortion is legal in their state, and a third of the people across the US are unaware if emergency contraception is legal in their state. This confusion is more widespread in states where abortion is banned, which makes sense. And just to illustrate the effect of this confusion, there are 26 million women and girls in states where abortion is banned or severely restricted. After Dobbs, we saw a 300% increase in the demand for emergency contraception. People, as you may have read, were stockpiling this drug in red states. The confusion is compounded by new concerns related to abortion actions. Privacy, for example, is a new concern. Today, we live with our mobile phones, which create a lasting digital record of our lives. There's a great deal of fear among women about private digital information that may be used against them in red states. Individual phones may know that they are pregnant, that their carriers are pregnant before those carriers do. Is that discoverable? An individual's search data, if they are looking for abortion medication or reproductive health clinics, is that discoverable? Is their phone's location data showing that they have visited a health clinic discoverable? This sense of chaos also undermines the legitimacy of our legal institutions and the rule of law. Some are so angry at the Supreme Court for taking away a constitutional right. This, by the way, is the first time that our Supreme Court has overturned a landmark decision and taken away individual rights as opposed to affording more individual rights to people. And they are angry at their state legislatures for not representing the majority. They are encouraging others to disregard the courts and encouraging people to aid and abet abortions. You may have seen t-shirts that say, "I aid and abet abortion," proudly displayed on the front of a t-shirt. They are encouraging people to take matters into their own hands. Citizens feel that they were lied to when recent Supreme Court appointments said that Roe was well-established precedent, and then joined the majority overturning that. People are being trained to counsel people on medical abortions, and to help provide surgical abortions. There is an underground abortion movement which is growing. Organizations are helping to transport people out of red states, to help house people, to help them find clinics, pay for their expenses, and get them home safely. So that gives you a little sense of why I think of what's going on right now in terms of a gray wave. We've gone backward, we are losing our rights, and there's significant confusion and chaos. But of course, there's some good news here too. Our country is majority pro-choice. Where abortion is on the ballot, pro-choice measures tend to win, as do pro-choice candidates in those states. Some states have enacted pro-choice protections in their state constitutions. The FDA has just approved an over-the-counter birth control pill for the first time. Opill will be sold without a prescription, which will be a game changer. And private companies are innovating on how to increase the accessibility of birth control and emergency contraception pills where the government is failing women. The United States, it turns out, is the 4th country in the world to take away reproductive rights, along with Poland, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. Some 59 to 60 countries have expanded reproductive justice. As I've argued, this move has sent us backward in terms of gender equality, and it's created quite a crisis in our country. There's no question in my mind that providing reproductive justice, providing access to reproductive health services serves so many of the UN's SDGs. It helps to eradicate poverty and hunger, to promote good health and well-being, to ensure gender equality and economic growth, to ensure peace and justice and strong institutions. I hope you can see how a decision from our highest court taking away a fundamental right of women, a right women have relied on for close to 50 years, has challenged so many of these core tenets. We must now look to our sister countries that have successfully created a green wave, expanding reproductive justice in their countries, look to them for learnings and strategies on how we might seek to ensure more justice for women and persons capable of becoming pregnant in this country. It is not a time to go backward, but to look to our neighbors and fight once again to move forward toward greater equality and greater justice for all. Thank you.
Lisa has previous compromises, so at some point she's going to be leaving. I want to use this time. There are so many things going through my head. For a long time, people have argued, attorneys, judges, that the legal foundation of Roe was problematic.
Yes.
If you were a judge
Yes.
at the Supreme Court and you were writing the opinion to reverse Dobbs,
Yes.
what would you use as a legal foundation?
What a great question. So you're absolutely right that so many thoughtful legal scholars criticized the Roe decision because it was based on a notion of substantive due process and privacy, which was not specifically mentioned in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, but emanated from the first 10 amendments. And that was not seen as a strong foundation. It was later looked toward the Liberty Clause, again, in the substantive due process rights framework. And, you know, at the time, Roe grew out of decisions involving contraception, which were based in that notion of privacy. So it was seen as, you know, on that path or in that continuum. I think later on, people began to see that women's access to reproductive health care really has a great deal to do with equality and should be based in the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And there has been some recognition of that, albeit small recognition in Supreme Court opinions. I'll tell you one interesting, so if I were a Supreme Court justice, that is where I would focus my analysis and my attention. And I'll say one quick sort of fun story which involves my former boss, Justice Ginsburg. She had a case involving a military woman named Susan Struck, I think it was, who was in the military and became pregnant. And our country had a rule, our military had a rule that if you became pregnant, you had to get an abortion or leave the military. This was before Roe v. Wade, so this was in early 70s, 71, 72, that the case came up. And she argued at the time, Justice Ginsburg did, she was then an advocate, arguing at the ACLU Women's Rights Project, she argued at the time that this was an equal protection violation, that you were treating men in the military differently than you were treating women by forcing them to have an abortion or leave the military. And the military ended up saying, gosh, your arguments are right, so we're going to change our rules. And they did so in 1972, the year before Roe v. Wade. So that was good for that plaintiff, but it ended up potentially being too bad for the way that the law ended up being described, the constitutional foundation of Roe v. Wade. Had Justice Ginsburg brought that case to the Supreme Court, and she certainly had a very successful track record, that Roe v. Wade, the right to an abortion, may have been based in the Equal Protection Doctrine. But as chance would have it, Roe v. Wade was the case that made it to the Supreme Court and not the Susan Struck case.
Thank you. It also strikes me, so the World Jurist Association and the World Forum, their motto is justice, peace through law. Sorry. So what's the predicament of then? What do you do when the law absolutely discriminates and then has the effect? So what you're mentioning is precisely not following the rule of law. So it's not the protection of democracy and the protection of the citizens through law,
Right.
but the violation of women's rights
Right.
and human rights through the law.
Yes. I mean, it was devastating. It was like something we have never seen before, having rights taken away and then seeing the power of those laws that were being passed in these red states, which suddenly, were not only criminalizing something that women have been doing for some 50 years, but were pitting citizens against the citizens of other states, where suddenly, again, the likes of which we haven't seen. I think the chaos that it created, the anger that it created, people lost trust in the Supreme Court. It was difficult to understand why this decision had been overturned, other than the fact that the bench had changed. That we had lost the moderates, we had lost the middle, and we had a bench that leaned far to the right, and sort of followed a constitutional philosophy that is rather extreme in this country and doesn't allow for our expanded and evolved notions of equality and liberty. So you're absolutely right. And it was, it felt as though the rug were pulled out from underneath us on many different levels with respect to our sense of what this country stands for and what these institutions are meant to uphold.
I know we could be talking about this topic the whole day, probably a whole panel dedicated on this. But I think we could circle back to it at the end if possible. But I would like to hear from now from Hermine. I'd like you to hear from Hermine Hayes, and well, she'll explain her subject. Hermine Hayes-Klein. The floor is yours. Thank you. And Lisa, thank you. If you have to leave, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Justice Oronoz Rodriguez, and thank you all. It's an honor to be here with these amazing leaders and to have the opportunity to speak to this critical topic together with all of you today. Is this working okay? Is it?
It's going to be,
It
it's
doesn't
for recording, but it
Got
doesn't
it.
amplify.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean, when we think about the motto of the World Jurist Association, to peace through law, I think about the philosophy of John Stuart Mill and the argument that he made in the 1860s when he's addressing a world in which the concept of human rights had not yet been created. And the point that he made was every society has a choice to make about whether it's going to organize itself around the principle of might makes right or not. As long as we organize ourselves around might makes right, then those who are willing to use violence and power to dominate others will do so. And once we make a decision that we do not want to organize ourselves that way, then we commit to other principles as the foundation for our social organization. And so since we have decided globally, for the most part, to commit ourselves to these principles of rule of law, human rights, equality and dignity for all, our work since then has always been to use the law to aspire toward a world that we do not yet see. Ever since we have made such commitments, we are confronted with societies that are still organized around these old principles of might makes right. And slowly, through our application and evolution of the law, we develop these principles and we apply it in ways that get us closer to the principles that we aspire toward. But as jurists, we must always, in a sense, keep our eye on that prize and be willing to rise above the reality that we see rather than reinforce it. And so movements for gender equality globally have tended to evolve in stages. Our first work is to establish women as human being and citizen. And that's our establishment of the right to vote, the right to be recognized as any kind of political actor, to some extent our right to own property. This is the first foundation of gender equality. And once we have achieved any kind of success with this, we can move on to another stage. And of course, it is the case everywhere that none of these stages have been perfected. Nowhere is it perfectly established that everybody with a uterus is a human being and a citizen. And yet, once we establish enough of a baseline, we move on to our next work. And the next work of a gender equality movement is to establish women's right to be something other than a wife and mother. Because as long as there is patriarchy, women have been kept tightly in that role of wife and mother, and it has not served them, and it has not served anybody. And in this sense, everybody should be familiar with the very important work of the Nobel Prize-winning Bangladeshi economist Amartya Sen. His work on gender mortality disparities illuminate the intersection between our right to survival, which is our foundational right to be a human being, and our right to be something other than a wife and mother. Because when he studied gender mortality disparities around the world, he found, his thesis was, for every 100 men, biologically speaking, there should be 104 women. But there are places where there are 100 women to 100 men, or 95 women, or even 85 women. And he started to look at, well, what is it about these cultures where women are missing? He published his results in an article in the New York Review of Books called 100 Million Women Are Missing in 1990. And what he described was that those places where women are missing, those places where with gender mortality disparities, are those places where women's work does not result in capital, where women's work is unpaid. In those places, women are literally worth less, despite the rhetoric of our importance that keeps us trapped in that space of wife and mother. And so this work of feminism in the United States, in the Western world, and around the world elsewhere has given the attention that the rights to contraception and abortion need and deserve. It's critical to establish those rights. And those rights are fragile. In all contexts, as we aspire toward peace through law, I think about a point that Justice Kennedy made in an earlier panel today, which is that children can be educated to not know what freedom is. And the converse of that is that children can be educated to understand how new and fragile our rights are. And if they're not in the context of gender equality, we really don't know. There are a lot of young people today who don't really understand that 150 years ago, women could not own property, could not leave an abusive husband without leaving their children behind, and the work that has been done decade by decade, generation by generation, to get us to the fragile rights that we have now. Dobbs shows us how fragile those rights are and how deep the work is of protecting and trying to advance these rights. What I'm here to talk about today is the fact that even as we stand on these shaky platforms of women as human being and citizen, and women as having the right to be something other than a wife and mother through our rights to education, our rights to work, our rights to equal pay, feminism has not completed its work until it has empowered that space of motherhood for those people who do choose to carry a baby to term. The feminization of poverty is closely tied to motherhood. Motherhood is an impoverishing state for women around the world. And glancing at my notes. The vulnerability of the mother impacts the child, impacts the family, impacts the community, impacts the society. Violence against the mother shapes the life of the child. Maternal trauma and depression affect the child not only in utero, and they do, but affect how the mother is able to parent that child once the child is born. So while our work is far from finished in establishing the humanity of women and our rights to work and contribute to public life and all the other rights, all movements for gender equality must include the protection and empowerment of women as mothers in order to accomplish meaningful gender equality. That must include paid leave, access to childcare, protections from losing our ability to work due to our caretaking obligations. But it starts with pregnancy and childbirth. A woman carrying a baby to term is at her most vulnerable and, in a sense, at her most powerful. And the way she is treated by her healthcare providers, particularly through the process of childbirth, is going to amplify one of those conditions. And she will come out of childbirth either traumatized or at least victimized, or she will come out feeling empowered and strong and ready to start mothering that child. A significant number of women around the world are coming out of childbirth traumatized. And what our studies on maternal trauma and depression following childbirth show us is that it is not the mode of delivery that results in whether women come out traumatized. It is not whether the child is born vaginally or by cesarean. What makes the difference between trauma and well-being after childbirth is whether the woman felt in control throughout that process of her health care. And by in control, we don't mean in control of nature, because nature is unpredictable. We mean whether her rights to autonomy and fundamentally informed consent and refusal were respected by her providers throughout her care. Currently, they are not in most healthcare systems around the world, and the ways in which they are violated reflect the cultures in which those violations are occurring. About 10 to 15 years ago, Latin American women's groups named the phenomenon of the abuse of women because it is so widespread throughout Latin America, where cesarean section rates go from 75 to 100%, particularly in private hospitals. We have studies all over the world, in the United States and elsewhere, that show us that the cesarean section rate is closely correlated to time convenience incentives and profit incentives on the part of providers, and have very little to do with the clinical conditions of women. Within the United States, cesarean section rates vary from 7 to 70% across hospitals, and studies have made clear that it's not about the clinical condition of the women presenting at those hospitals. It is about provider preference, the provider preference for the mode of delivery. And so again, providers can have their preferences, but if you're a patient who wants to avoid an unnecessary surgery that increases your risk of death, your baby's risk of death, and risk of death in your downstream pregnancies, your only shield against those kinds of dysfunctions is a reliable right of informed consent and refusal, and that means that there's accountability for the violation of that right. The phenomenon of obstetric violence, which has gone from being a radical term coined by women's rights groups to a term that's used by the United Nations and the World Health Organization and written about now by courts and law review articles, is this phenomenon is the gap between the law of informed consent and the culture of obstetrics, which ignores the law of informed consent. So the issues of autonomy and reproductive choice pertinent to contraception and abortion continue to be just as important if a woman carries the fetus to term and gives birth to it. So as we regroup to reclaim and protect those rights in the post-Dobbs era, we can and should do so in a way that includes protection of those rights in all contexts, including the context of pregnancy and childbirth. Reproductive decisions, when they're driven underground, whether it's abortion or, for example, the right to access a midwife, the right to give birth vaginally, when the state tries to drive those decisions underground with the idea that women shouldn't be allowed to make those decisions, what we know about abortion is true in the case of childbirth as well. It doesn't change women's decisions. It punishes them for those decisions by causing them to die from those decisions. And this happens in childbirth as it happens in abortion. Childbirth is still fundamentally, because it has been ignored by the women's movement, it continues to exist in a pre-feminist state. And so women are expected when they access care to essentially be passive, to be obedient, and to obey whatever doctor is standing in front of them, telling them that they should have whatever intervention is being recommended. That is not a rational assumption for an informed provider. That is not a rational requirement for a healthcare system, given the variability of these interventions and given the fact that we know in the United States we're the only industrialized nation with rising maternal mortality. And that fact is linked to the fact that we overuse a surgery that increases the woman's risk of dying in childbirth by 3 to 5 times. Gender discrimination is the baseline for the mistreatment of women in pregnancy and childbirth. But what we also know is that racism and discrimination for any form increases the abuse of women. For every layer in the United States, that translates into racial mortality disparities in childbirth that we know are closely linked to, again, an increased inability or refusal to hear the voices of the birthing people who are presenting for care. For every layer of otherness that is projected onto the body of a birthing person, we know not only in the United States, but around the world in the context of Roma women, in the context of migrant women, and really any vulnerable group giving birth anywhere, that discrimination means that they are more likely to die in childbirth and they're more likely to see their babies die. So the elimination of discrimination in maternal health care is critical both to the preservation of women's right to survive, their physical health, and also to their mental health. And so as we consider the elimination of maternal mortality through the SDGs, if we're going to do that in a new and better way than we've done it before, we have to do it in a way that recognizes that women have a right to survive. We do have that baseline right to be recognized as human beings and for healthcare to be utilized for us and to survive, but it is not our only human right. And so that when the Millennium Development Goals recognized preventable maternal mortality as a human rights issue, but failed to explicitly acknowledge the full spectrum of human rights at stake in pregnancy and childbirth, those systems that attempted to implement the pursuit of the reduction in maternal mortality did so in the construction of systems that can resemble cesarean section assembly lines, that do not in fact reduce maternal mortality, and that result in the violation and abuse of women's rights during childbirth. So we know now that we can and must do better. We know now, for example, that the inclusion and integration of midwives in maternal health systems is critical to the reduction and elimination of maternal mortality and to improving outcomes for the lowest costs. The marginalization of midwives from maternal health systems is another form of gender-based discrimination. It has nothing to do with health care. The studies are very clear. Any functioning maternal health system has midwives. They are strong, they are integrated, and they are independent from doctor control. So when you're looking at a maternal health system that doesn't have midwives working both out of the hospital and in the hospital, and those midwives are not strong, secure, and confident, you're looking at a maternal health system that is not based around the needs of women and that is not serving women. So advocacy for gender equality in maternal health care must include protection and advocacy for midwives and their ability to work in all settings. So in conclusion, we are continuing this work to move toward gender equality in all contexts around the world. And to do that, we must educate the young on how far we've come and what it has looked like to take those steps forward and those 2 steps back, what worked and what didn't work, so that they can continue to stand upon the shoulders of those who have come before, rather than have to reinvent the wheel and start all over again from scratch. Thank you.
I kept writing questions and you kept answering them before I got to so your findings, I'm not saying it necessarily has to be in a study, but your findings are, if I'm correct, that the relationship between midwifery, let me rephrase the question. Healthcare systems that include midwifery, does it relate or does that expand to a system or a jurisdiction or a country that is overall more gender equal or that has more equality regarding gender?
The way that women are treated in childbirth is a reflection of how women are treated, of their
Overall.
social, political, economic, and reproductive rights in the larger context. And so when we compare maternal health systems around the world, arguably the best maternal health system in the world is New Zealand, which is also the country where women first had the right to vote. And they have the best outcomes, and they have the strongest midwives. Their midwives are strong and independent. They're the first line of care. Around Europe, Northern Europe has the best systems. They have systems, with reproductive choice, with strong and independent midwives, and they have the lowest intervention rates and the best outcome rates. As you get closer to the Mediterranean, you get more patriarchal, more abusive maternal health systems, and you find midwives in Greece, for example, where you've got, the highest C-section rate in Europe and a lot of obstetric violence, and the midwives there, they're not allowed to catch the baby, for example, when it comes out in the hospital. So I could go on and on and on. It's real. Yeah, around the world. But that's what's so amazing, because childbirth is a universal physiological process, and human rights are universal. And yet the way it plays out across cultures varies according to that culture, because childbirth, at the end of the day, how we do it is very culturally driven. Right. It's a cultural rite of passage. But that gets back to the lodestar of the human right. What is the way that we sort of navigate through these cultural differences to justice by remembering what the law requires? And the law requires the same thing everywhere. It requires that before anybody can do anything to your body in a healthcare context, they look you in your eyes, they tell you what they want to do, they tell you why they want to do it and what it's going to involve, they tell you what the risks are, they tell you what the alternatives are, they answer all your questions in your language that you understand, and then they look you in the eyes again and ask you what you want to do. Anybody here who's given birth or is close to anybody who has, ask yourself how many times that happened around the important decisions that had to be made in your health care. And if you understand that, you're looking at the gap. And again, that gap, the violation of the rights, the impact on the individual may vary. Some come out of it like, meh, okay. Some come out of it broken. But all have the right to have their rights enforced. And nobody gets to say, well, all those other women are accepting it, so you have to accept it too.
Earlier last month, Hermine gave a conference to judges in Puerto Rico. So it was mostly judges, few support employees, and it was focused on informed consent and obstetric care. And I don't think there was anyone in the audience who didn't leave, those of us who had given birth, asking at each and every step of the way, did I give my consent? And it was presented in such a way that it was shocking, and it was very powerful, very powerful. So thank you. I know we're gonna round back to this subject, but I want to give also time for Hilarie, who I introduced earlier, and she's also very, very much involved in
You get to watch the movie
the
later.
World Jurist Association. She's done many things. But now she's thankfully focused on empowering women around the globe. So, floor is
Thank
yours.
you. So I'm going to change the discussion point a bit, despite the fact I'd like nothing more but to continue to talk about reproductive rights and maternal health care. But my focus is really on what happens when women get into the employment space. Even in industrialized nations where there are all kinds of laws on the books to protect them. And what we know is that despite the fact that women are graduating from medical school, law school, architectural school, you name it, engineering, at higher numbers than ever before. I mean, for example, law schools in the United States now have 56% of their entering classes are women. This assumption that this was the lack of women leaders was simply a pipeline issue, and over the course of 20 to 30 years, we would reach true gender parity in leadership across these professions and across corporate America, we now realize is false. It has not happened. And so we really need to investigate to determine what is happening to all the women. Getting out of law school, medical school, engineering school, they are hired at a rate consistent with their graduation rates, 50-50 for many of them. But at each year after graduation, more and more women leave the field. In fact, in law, women leave at 150% the rate of men. And so the question we all have to focus on is what happened to all the women and why are they leaving? When I was ABA president, we did a major research study on why were women leaving the practice of law. And what we came up with was not inconsistent with what we've now learned is happening with women doctors, women engineers, and other women professionals. And that is what we refer to as death by 1,000 cuts. It's not a singular issue that causes women to decide, this is not for me, I'm out, but a series of the way they are treated on a daily basis that convinces them that there is no purpose to stay in their profession because they will never be treated on an equitable basis with their male colleagues to their right and left. And I can give you multiple examples of this. But what we know is there is implicit bias in the workplace that is reflected in everything from pay to promotions to the nature of the work that women are allowed to work on. And one of the best statistics is that in the legal field, as an example, 67% of women lawyers in the United States indicate that the day they became a mother, it altered the clients they were given access to, the nature of the projects they were given, and the general perception of their commitment to the workplace. Now, if you ask senior leadership, male senior leadership in these professions, why this is the case, they will immediately respond in the same way. Well, we all understand that women's major commitment is to their family, and of course, once they become mothers, they can't possibly be as committed to the workplace as the men. To which I respond, well, when was the last time you asked a man which was more important to him, his family or his work? Because I assure you, you will get the same response. But the inherent bias against women is very deep-seated in the concept that once a woman becomes a mother, that should be her top priority, and therefore she couldn't possibly be as committed to the workplace as her male colleagues. Now, this bias is reflected in so many different ways, and one of the best examples is when a woman comes in and tells her employer that she is having a child. The typical reaction is, oh, that's wonderful, and the mental note is she really going to come back from maternity leave? And when you come in and describe that you're having a second child, then it is inevitable that the assumption is you may go part-time for a while, but at some point you are going to leave the employment. And in fairness, the reality is that it's a stereotype and stereotypes are in existence because there's evidence to support them. In many instances, some women do decide that they're going to take time away from their profession and stay at home or make some other arrangement for their child care. But on the other hand, when a man comes in and explains that he is going to become a parent, the reaction from employers is 100% the opposite. It is, now they're a breadwinner, they're going to work harder than ever, I can really rely on them, they're on a future track. And I assure you, if you ask male employers this question in 100 different ways, you will consistently get the same response. That women are assumed not to be as committed to the workplace once they become a mother. But the bias against women really goes much deeper than that. There is an assumption as to the way a woman is supposed to behave. We are supposed to be warm and nurturing and social and consensus builders, all of which are, in some ways, beneficial stereotypes. That's fine. But when you think of somebody who meets that description, you're not thinking in your head, this is my next CEO. It's an assumption that this quote-unquote softness that women are supposed to bring as part of their personality is not leadership material. On the other hand, women who come in are goal-oriented, ambitious, driven, they know what they want to accomplish. What is the immediate reaction in the workplace? They're too aggressive, they're bitchy, they're too strong-willed. I don't really like working with them. And those inherent assumptions play out in opportunities that are given to women. When it comes time to seek a promotion, when it comes time to seek a pay raise, what we know is that women historically don't ask for pay raises or don't object when they're given their bonus. In fact, we know that typically when a man is offered a salary package, 9 times out of 10 they will come back and ask for more money. Women do not do that. And the assumption was that women didn't do that because they were uncomfortable asking. What we now know is that the studies reflect that for those women that do ask, they may get more money, but they're considered less likely to get the future promotion because people don't like them as much. So it's this double bind of this assumption of what a woman, how a woman is supposed to behave. And it's a very, very thin line that makes an acceptable combination of personality traits that can make you both fitting in this male view of what a woman is supposed to look like and also perceived as capable of having the leadership qualities for future elevation. So this implicit bias goes through on multiple other ways. We know, of course, that there is this wage gap. Even in the US, women are paid approximately 82 cents per dollar for every dollar that a man makes. This is a wage gap that made a lot of progress through the 70s, but in the last 20 years, it has not moved at all. What we know is if the wage gap in the US was eliminated, the poverty rate would be cut in half. And yet, despite all the laws on the books for women theoretically being paid comparable wages for the same work, that is not the case. And again, it is a factor of this implicit bias about what women should be entitled to receive. We know, for example, there was just a Harvard Business Review article just in the last couple of weeks about ageism against women. And the conclusion of the Harvard Business Review article was there's really no perfect age to be a woman. That women, even up to the age of 40, were described as having their heads patted and said, yes, there will be opportunities, but you're really still too young and inexperienced to get access to fill in the blank. This promotion, this great project, this opportunity to bring in a new client. And yet, some point after the age of 40, the switch flips and, oh, well, we really want a young go-getter for that job. And so what this study reflected is that at every step of a woman's career, age proved to be a negative factor. There was never a time where a woman was the right age for whatever opportunity she was looking to have. We know that COVID, as you heard at the beginning in our introduction, has had a very deleterious effect to women in the workplace. Why? Because in most households, the woman is the lesser income. So when suddenly children were at home, waiting to be homeschooled, there were more of a necessity that somebody be reducing their hours or potentially giving up their job. It was the women who did it. And the question will now become, well, okay, what happens when those women now re-enter the workforce? Historically, when women re-enter the workforce, for example, after taking time off for childbearing, they are given lesser jobs and lesser money because we can get away with doing that. So why would we offer women more money than we know that they'll be forced to take? And so it's going to be very interesting in this next couple of years to see and in the US alone, there were over 2 million women that left the workplace completely. What happens when these women return? Because the assumption is going to be that 2-year gap or 3-year gap of employment is likely to take 10 to 15 years for them to recover the same amount of recognition in the workplace. Now, we do know from study after study that women are in fact better than men at a number of skill sets. Women are considered better at working out compromises. Women are more likely to be honest and ethical. Women are more likely to stand up for what they believe than men. Women are more likely to provide fair wages to their employees. And we know that women are better at mentoring. Now, the great news for us is that wonderful, we have these wonderful traits. The bad news is many of them are not compensated for in the workplace. So you will notice that in many environments, women are the ones who are best at volunteering, whether it's working with the summer interns or putting together the social events or whatever it is. We typically are the first to raise our hands because we assume that's going to get us brownie points. In fact, however, what we know is that it's not going to get you brownie points, and it's probably going to get you less income at the end of the year because you're going to have had less productive time to bill hours or to provide experience, get experience from various opportunities that you are now forced to give up because you're spending 200 hours a year doing the jobs that the men don't want to volunteer for. Now, what we know, and what I spend a lot of time talking to CEOs about, is there are ways to address all of these issues. There are ways to objectively give everybody on a team an opportunity to get access to the best client, irrespective of the number of children they may have. There are ways to do objective evaluations. For example, we know that something like 70% of evaluations done of women employees specifically mention personality traits. Doesn't happen in male reviews. And there is actually now an AI app where you can have these reviews read by this logarithm, and it will tell you that John Smith in Department Z is actually evaluating people on a gender bias basis. So there are a tremendous amount of things that we can now do, but like everything else, none of this will happen without a commitment, senior leadership in whatever corporation, law firm, medical practice that we're working in, that this is important. Because if there's not the commitment from senior leadership, it will not happen. And what we know is that those entities that have figured this out consistently do better. Corporations and businesses with women in senior leadership have a better return on investment than those who do not. Having diverse thought leaders at the table is a positive. Providing psychological safety where people believe they can actually express their opinions despite the fact that they may be different from what would normally be accepted is considered one of the most important things for innovative thought. And so in the context of the workplace, until such time as women feel comfortable that they will have the opportunities to succeed by working no harder than men, women will continue to leave the workplace, and we will all be the lesser for it. I want to make sure we leave time for questions, so.
I'm gonna ask for an extension to the room for another half hour. 5 minutes we have? That was incredible.
Because I have to leave today's question. Unfortunately, one of the panelists left, and I wanted also to address the question to her. We all know this decision of the Supreme Court about abortions. It had really last year, a big lesson last year, because with the exception of Poland, where women are very much involved in against this amendment to the legislation, the rest of the countries in Europe do not have these restrictions. And in this regard, I want you to ask the panelists any other form of collective reaction to this tendency, which is very dangerous, because apart from everything else that was brilliant, I have to say thank you very much, very, very much informative, because I'm in a hurry. That's why I want just questions. Extremely valuable and very rich in substance presentation, so thank you very much. But I wanted to ask, because we cannot just limit ourselves to findings that this is the status quo. There should be an action.
There is.
Because, and that is very good when you are confirming, because otherwise, let us see what's going to happen in some years. I don't like this, because then we're leaving the event to unfold independently, and that is not good.
There's no chance in the world this is staying on the books. I can give you my personal guarantee. It's just a question of how long it will take. So, let me tell you what's happening. There's not been a vote in any state. Oh, sure.
Questions.
Sure.
Also, about women, and you said, Judge, that they tend to leave in some years successfully, probably, their workplaces because they wouldn't be treated equally with men. I think that there is something also that is related to the culture. I don't like when I hear man as a symbol of his love to his wife or fiancé or girlfriend to say, I'm going to take care of you. No, we don't need someone to take care of us. We could take care of anyone else, and we are independent human beings. And as you said, we are sometimes very strong, much stronger psychologically, more sustainable in our approaches to some problematic areas in life. Although, what you said, I like very much all these studies that we are more colorful in our assessment of life. There is recently some tendency where the judge sitting next to me has participated, I couldn't participate, with regard to the assessment, a book launch on feminist judgment. There are developments in this regard, but I've been very happy about what is attributed to my gender. At the same time, I think that it is very important that we do not, in a way, create this competition with males, because they have to be next to us, and they have to be fighting together with us, and they have to be our partners. And it is for them to come and say, my wife is a genius, she's much better than I. So in this regard, we have to be psychologically a little bit more careful when we approach seeking the partnership in our battles. What I want. So I stop here, but thank you very, very much.
There's a lot to comment. I don't think, I'm convinced gender equality benefits men and women. It does just help women. It helps men, women, families, communities, and countries. I think I heard you talk about adjudication with a gender perspective. I've been trying to talk about that to judges in Puerto Rico. It doesn't mean that you're gonna always favor the woman. It doesn't mean that you value the testimony of a woman over the testimony of a man. It just means that you have to understand everything that has happened before, that has put us in a position in an androcentric society, for example, like Puerto Rico, where, and I'll touch on something that you said, let's say you have a case regarding child custody. Even though the law says custody will be shared 50-50 in equal terms if the parents are basically situated in the same position, because of our mentality that women take care of the children and men are the breadwinners, unconsciously, women judges and male judges are going to be assigning that custody in a higher percentage to women than to men. that's bad for everybody. That's bad for the women who are going to be hindered in their professional capacity, and it's bad for fathers who want to spend time with their kids, and it's bad for kids. So I think it's just, we need to understand what's going on to break those biases. It happens in obstetrics, it happens in judging, it happens, so we have to talk about it, we have to understand how it reflects on each of our jobs so that we can sort of eliminate it when we're making decisions, particularly legal decisions or in law firms. I know they're making signs that we shouldn't. I'm just going to propose something so that we don't have to end this conversation now. Voluntarily, I'll put a note. If everybody wants to leave their name or an email, we can convoke in the future, maybe do a Zoom continuation of this panel. I have lots of questions for the panelists. I imagine you have questions. It's been absolutely lovely. It's been an honor having you here. And I'm sorry we don't have Justice Sujata and that we don't have Lisa here as well. I think we have to continue this conversation because I think from here we'll delve into other topics, and I know we have our panels. I would like to actually know also from what countries you're talking, because I know the problems in Puerto Rico are different from the problems in Mexico and Poland and Italy. So, and I think we have to sit down and see where we have common ground, or where we can look to each other and see how have you done it and what have you done and what can I be doing to get to the next stage of equal rights and gender equality. So for now, thank you. I am so honored to have been part of this. And thank you for being here. I know there are many tables, many panels, and I am very grateful that you were here to speak about here at this one. Thank you.